Also ich will jetzt euch mal etwas sagen.
Bueno, siempre has querido decirles que... Oh, okay. We went to the other courthouse.
Top what's it supposed to be?
What's happening today? Huh, sir? What's happening? Nobody can talk? P. Diddy. Who? P. Diddy? Oh, yeah, what?
I'm gonna be on TV. I'm gonna be on TV. Hello. I ain't doing nothing wrong.
Yeah, man, I took the flyer from that.
But I really want to.
Thank you. Thank you.
And then
I was inspired by you and your
Did it look like rain?
But he's doing a town hall in Pennsylvania on Monday, and we concluded.
The only thing I can think of is how he shot
It really kind of cool to find out how happy it is.
that might make sense, but like again, I have what's the other? Yeah, but on my full-time super. Did she put it on her pipeline successfully?
Damn, I just went past room 110. You see now,
Seems like a bullshit.
Oh, wow. Запомни стоять.
differentiates between water and
This is good. Chào đi.
bữa mở ra cái là
The Korean que está acá.
Do not have.
No, that's him. Well,
That's nice.
Staten Island.
Oh, see my order. Yeah, he used to run.
You didn't get any stupid things or anything.
There's that little script. There's a little script in there. There's a spot. That little script is like what's your scores, what's your cheats? Yep. Okay, hold on. It is. Yeah. It's nice.
All your fans.
Told you what happened, then what happened.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome to our special coverage of Sean Diddy Combs' bail hearing part 2. I'm Jesse Weber. So after the rapper and producer was officially indicted by the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York on 3 charges yesterday: racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by fraud, force, and coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. What happened yesterday afternoon? Well, Judge Robin Tarnowski denied Combs' application for bail, pretrial release yesterday. Now, that is not the end of the story. Why? Well, his defense is fighting this. And look, they had offered a $50 million bond to be secured by his property in Miami, home confinement, GPS monitoring, But the judge was not persuaded. The judge was more persuaded by the government, who said that Combs should be denied bail. They argue that putting aside the heinous nature of these allegations and the weight of the evidence in this case, everything from sexual abuse, violence, intimidation, acts of kidnapping, and arson, but really where it came down to is that Combs had allegedly been tampering with witnesses, reaching out to people to get them to not cooperate with the government. So now Combs' legal team has appealed this decision to a different judge who reportedly will now oversee the remainder of this case. U.S. District Court Judge Andrew Carter. We know that Combs' team has submitted a new letter to Judge Carter. This is in anticipation of arguments that will happen at 3:30 p.m. Eastern. We're waiting to see what will happen. Again, there are no cameras in that courtroom, but we will update you. There's going to be people inside the courtroom. We're going to let you know the latest. And I will also tell you that just minutes before we came live, the government, the prosecution, submitted a letter to the court as well. And it's interesting. It's really interesting to hear why they say that his bail, again, should be denied. And I will have a lot to talk about with this because we are learning a lot more details. For example, during the course of the defense's letter that they submitted today, they have also provided, it's 124 pages, it's much longer than it was yesterday, but they have submitted correspondence between them and the attorneys from the United States Southern District, the United States State Attorney's Office. So I have a lot to get into. I want to bring on right now, as we wait for these updates and hear what the judge will decide, I want to bring on former prosecutor and attorney Nima Rahmani to talk more about this. Nima, thank you so much for coming on. It's good to see you. So we're kind of in this breaking news bubble right now. We're going to wait to see. I'm getting updates. And if anything happens, I'll let our viewers know. I have to talk about this. I have to talk about this. Okay. So this is the prosecution's letter. And in this letter, again, where they're saying that he should be denied bail, they quote a lot about what happened yesterday. They quote Judge Tarnofsky, who said there are also indications in your history and characteristics that I think are a reason why the presumption in favor of detention has not been rebutted. And I can get more to that, but there are new allegations in here that I have to talk about. So first, and this is quite shocking. I'm going to go towards the end of it. They say that, I'm just going to pull it up right now, that, where is it? The fact is, you know what? I'm going to find that in a second. Oh, yeah, here it is. So it says, finally, it bears noting that within the first 24 hours of this case's unsealing. So we're talking about what happened yesterday. There are already new concerns about witness interference, as well as interference with a fair trial based on the defendant and his counsel's attempts to publicly discredit one of the victims. And they talk about how yesterday, during the bail argument and a subsequent appearance on CNN, defense counsel for Sean Combs impugned the allegations made by a statutory victim challenging the motivation and timing of her claims. The government therefore requests that the court caution the defendant and counsel not to violate, and they talk about a specific criminal rule. It seems, I think that's about extrajudicial statements. So the fact that now the prosecutors are going after Combs and his attorney about what they did in the last 24 hours as more reason for why he should not be released. What do you make of that?
Well, Jesse, when you're talking about detention pre-trial in federal cases, really taking a step back, it's really appropriate when someone's at risk of flight or a danger to the community. It sounds like the government's focused their attention on that danger component. Obviously, we know that Diddy has almost unlimited means. He's reportedly worth $1 billion, has access to private jets. But, in the 6 months after the raid, he didn't take off. He reportedly moved to New York to prepare for this arrest. So it's really that danger component. And I think what the government is trying to do is to establish that this is someone who can't be trusted if they're out in the community, because they know that an appeal of a detention order from a magistrate judge to a district judge, in any case, it's renewed it's reviewed de novo, which means for the first time for those of us who are watching. So really, what the magistrate judge did yesterday doesn't really have any precedential effect here. And they need to convince this district judge, Judge Carter, that there's no condition or combinations of conditions that can guarantee Diddy's appearance at trial. So whatever they can do to show witness tampering, obstruction, intimidation, that's all helpful for their detention argument.
And by the way, but the defense's argument would be, and they made several arguments yesterday, that he showed up to New York, he surrendered his passport, he has not fled the country, he was waiting for these charges to happen, he's been cooperative, they put together a bail package. You know what else they submitted today? And I thought it was really interesting, Nima. Yesterday, I think their letter was, I'm going to say 14, 16 pages. This one is now accompanied by exhibits that makes it 124 pages. So they seem to be submitting more evidence in favor of why their client should be released. And what they submitted was a selection of communications, email communications between them and the prosecutors. And in those communications, they indicate that Combs gave his passport to his lawyers, and they informed prosecutors for the past few months every time he was making a trip. So if he was going to Wyoming, or whether or not he was coming to New York, or he was going to California, the fact that they were having those communications and saying, look, we're not hiding, we're letting you know exactly what he's up to, I thought that was interesting, and whether or not that additional information will persuade this judge.
It was interesting, and normally it doesn't happen like that, because normally the time between a raid and an arrest and an indictment, usually you're talking about days or weeks. Now, obviously, some defendants do self-surrender. But having prosecuted drug trafficking, human trafficking cases, sex trafficking, normally those types of defendants that are looking at mandatory minimum sentences in federal prison, they're not afforded the opportunity to surrender, and they're certainly not given $50 million bail packages. So the question is, if the judge does allow for some sort of bail, is Diddy being treated differently than other criminal defendants because of his fame, his wealth, and his celebrity status? But
well, can I push you back on that? Let's say, for example, I think the $50 million bond package is to suggest this is impactful to me, right? This is what I can put up of a showing of good faith. Maybe if it's somebody who doesn't have $100 million or $500 million, and they put up their house or something like that, it's a signal of what they can put forward to say that, this is a finding in good faith. I will show up to every court hearing. I will not violate the terms. I will not be a flight risk. Wouldn't that be sufficient? I think it's relative, right?
Well, it's relative, but again, it's not just about flight. That's why I think the government's focused on the danger. This is a presumption case. This is a presumption of detention statutorily for these types of offenses. When Diddy's arrested at his hotel, reportedly, there's a pink powdery substance that's likely 2C, which is an illegal narcotic. So, this isn't someone, again, this is the former prosecutor in me arguing the government's case. I understand. I think the defense has actually a decent shot, I think, of getting this overturned on appeal. I don't think it's a black or white case, but usually, me, we've been doing this a very long time. I usually bring that prosecution perspective.
That's why I love having you on. I get both perspectives. And to be clear, that pink substance was revealed yesterday during the hearings. Now, I want to let everybody know we have an update. So we have an update for you. Sean Combs, he's at the defense table. And remember, there's no cameras in that courtroom, so we're going to do our best to kind of give you a visual of what happened. He's at the defense table. He's in a black shirt, not an inmate uniform, might be wearing the same clothes that he was wearing yesterday based upon that courtroom sketch. Two U.S. Marshals are seated behind him, and they're waiting on Judge Andrew L. Carter. We don't know how long this hearing will take, but we're going to provide everybody updates as it progresses. I think we also have with us criminal defense attorney Natalie Whittingham-Burrell to talk about this. So Natalie, good to see you. Thanks so much for coming on, for joining Nima and I. So we're getting also questions from our followers on YouTube. So if you have any questions right now for either me, Nima, Natalie, please submit the questions. We have a question from Gunn on YouTube. Natalie, I'll submit this to you. How long is Combs expected to stay in jail? Until trial?
Yes, if his bail status doesn't change today, he would stay until trial. If there's some type of change in circumstances between now and the trial date, if he is held, his attorney can file for another bond review, but more than likely he would be held until the trial date.
Natalie, what do you think about the chances that this appeal, having another judge, presumably the judge who will oversee the remainder of this case, determining what the issue of bail should be? Do you think that this judge will be more receptive to Combs' arguments and say, you know what, he should be released pending this trial?
It really depends, because Combs is in an interesting position. He's charged with a sex trafficking crime. And under the federal government, that comes with a presumption of flight risk and dangerousness because of the legislature. They looked at some research that said that people that are traffickers are more likely to take off running and not come to court. And so his attorney needed to rebut that by showing with some evidence that he's not dangerous. And that's what they had a really hard time with at the hearing yesterday. So I don't know what new evidence he's going to present or refine in order to show that Combs is not dangerous, because he was really more focused on the flight risk part of it during the hearing and not the dangerousness assessment. So he'll probably get that together this time, and maybe that will give Combs a chance at release.
Before you came on, we talked about how in the latest filing from the defense, the letter that they submitted to the court, there's all of this court correspondence between them and the prosecutors talking about what Diddy's been doing, you know, when he was deciding to leave the state, that he submitted his passport to his lawyers. I want to let everybody know something. From this letter that I'm also reading from the government, that was a response, and basically, again, reiterating why they believe Combs should be denied bail. And this is the section that talks, the defendant poses a risk of flight, Natalie. And it says, both at argument yesterday and in the press, the defendant has emphasized his supposed cooperation with the government, including his willingness to surrender. The court should take that argument for what it truly is: attorney-crafted theater designed to convince this court that the defendant can be trusted and is not a risk of flight. Make no mistake, the defendant's recent behavior shows that he cannot be trusted or controlled, particularly now that he is facing serious charges that carry significant penalties. And one of the things they say is, at least in or about January 2020, when the defendant was unquestionably aware of the criminal investigation, the evidence shows that he is engaged in multiple freak-offs. So these are what we learned in the indictment, although for anybody who's been following this case, we actually first heard it during the Cassandra Ventura lawsuit back in November of 2023. But it says that even in January 2024, he's engaged in multiple freak-offs, some involving the interstate transportation of individuals to participate, has continued to use narcotics, and has contacted multiple witnesses. What do you make of that, Natalie?
I think the contact is really the big issue here, and the prosecution is right to point it out, because if he is not in custody, there's really no way to stop him from doing that. And it is alarming, because he knows that this case is coming. He knows he's being investigated. He's seen the lawsuit. He's been raided, and then he's still contacting witnesses. That's very, very concerning. It's one thing for his attorney to do a pretrial investigation or pre-indictment investigation by having an investigator of their own reach out to the witnesses. But for the party themselves to reach out to the witnesses is extraordinary and concerning for the safety and integrity of the case. So if you don't want him tampering, you might need to hold him. As far as the freak offs are concerned, there is still a defense argument that everything that's being participated in is consensual. And when they say people being coming from one state to the other, as long as it's not for financial gain, that is not in and of itself, illegal to have someone come from another state to participate in consensual activity. So that's going to be something that the defense will have an easier time arguing against at the hearing, but not the contact with the witnesses.
Right, because those are commercial sex acts, right? So when you're talking about someone being paid or something, a promise of value of something given as well. Couple of things to note about this. I'm going to go back to this paper in a second, but we've noticed something. A couple of updates for you. So it says first, so the hearing has officially started. Apologize for the noise if you can hear that. We'll have to figure out what's going on here. But the hearing has started. The government is arguing that these freak-offs, that they were elaborate. The defendant used narcotics, including ketamine, GHB, and others. The freak-offs were arranged with his entourage. The defendant would record these freak-offs, at least in part, to use them to blackmail. And the government also referenced an example from an alleged victim. They said that Combs was going to expose them with a sex tape and claimed that Combs drugged them. So it's reinforcing the serious nature of these charges. And also, you talked about communication. Going back to the government's letter to the court today, it says the fact is the defendant has personally and repeatedly contacted multiple witnesses, including at least one he himself knew was a grand jury witness. So, Nima, what do you make of this?
So I think the government's conflating two issues, the flight risk and the danger. I think everything they're talking about in that letter goes to the dangerousness, right? I mean, you could not be a flight risk because you're informing the government and pretrial services of your whereabouts, you surrender your passport, but you can still be a danger. And I think that's what this all is. If he's under investigation, he's been raided, he's still using drugs, he's still participating in these freak-offs, I think that's concerning, but especially concerning, and just like you and Natalie highlighted, it's that obstruction. It's just tampering with the witnesses, threatening them, potential violence, bribing them. And we talked about it. He's got a lot of money. And these are individuals who are going to testify at trial as either victims or witnesses, or who have testified before the grand jury. I think that's what the judge is going to care about the most. If this individual is out on bond for months or maybe a year or more, is he going to obstruct the proceedings in this case? And I think that's going to be a factor that goes to that dangerousness and the presumption already there that's going to tip it in the government's favor.
And to let everybody know what they're proposing, again, a $50,000 bond. This is what the defense is proposing, a $50,000 bond co-signed by Combs, his mother, his sister, the mother of his oldest daughter, the mother of his youngest daughter, and 3 adult sons. It's going to be secured by the equity in his home in Miami, Florida. His travel will be restricted to the Southern District of Florida, the Southern District of New York. His passport will be surrendered, home detention with GPS monitoring. He's going to restrict the people who visit him. There will be no contact with known grand jury witnesses, although, as you can see, the prosecution does not believe that. They said that he's already been doing that. Natalie, I want to go to something else as we're waiting for updates right now from the court. In the government's letter as well, and this is interesting because we're in a 24-hour news cycle here. They seem to be responding automatically to what the defense has been asserting and kind of what maybe has been in the media, because one of the charges that Combs fakes, it's charge number 2, the argument is it's only with respect to one victim, even though this indictment references multiple victims and nobody's actually publicly identified. They seem to take issue with that. And I want to read this to you and get your perspective. To be clear, despite the indictment naming one victim in count 2, this case case is not about just one victim. The government's evidence to date, including the defendant's own communications, demonstrates that the defendant has used force and coercion against multiple victims. In addition to these women, the defendant has assaulted a host of other individuals, including his employees and witnesses to his violence. For example, the defendant directed his rage towards his employees and those close to victim one, we don't know exactly who that is, but it's possible it could be Cassandra Ventura, who had seen him physically abuse victim one, including by throwing these witnesses against walls and onto the ground, choking them and throwing objects at them, among other things, particularly when they attempted to protect victim one. In doing so, the defendant has demonstrated that he is not only a danger to victims and witnesses, but is also obstructive and willing to engage whatever is necessary, including physical violence, to instill fear in witnesses to keep them silent. All of this violence against victims, witnesses, and others factors into the analysis of the defendant's dangerousness. So the idea here, they're saying, yeah, it looks like one person is charged in count two, and they seem to be acknowledging that, but they say there's more victims here. What do you make of that?
I think that I understand where they're coming from. They probably have the one victim who is willing to testify as a victim. It is more than likely Cassie. And multiple incidents of assault against one victim is enough, okay? That's more than enough. However, they're gonna have to take it on the chin that the general public is going to be concerned that you put in your letter to the court for the reasons to hold Diddy, that there's an extensive amount of victims, but you've only indicted him on one. As myself, as a defense attorney, I'm pointing that out, right? I'm gonna say you're trying to gild the lily here. You didn't see that there was probable cause as to these other victims, so you didn't indict him as to these other victims. You're trying to make an end run around the indictment process and have my client seem more dangerous and hold him because you're alleging other victims. That is what that criticism is about, and it's a valid criticism. However, the prosecution is able in certain circumstances to show that there is a pattern of abuse as a reason for why a certain person should be held, even if only one victim is alleged. And to be clear, these allegations with relation to victim one, whoever that may be, are very concerning.
Very concerning. I mean, they keep emphasizing in their letter, and we heard it again in the indictment, this is sex trafficking, right? This is a very serious allegation here. That's why we talked about before the presumption of detention. Have a couple updates for you about what's happening in court. And again, if you have questions, submit them to us on YouTube. We'll answer them here on air. A couple updates. So first, talking about that dangerousness component, about why Combs should not be released. The government said that investigators seized 6 guns that were in Combs' homes. They're arguing that he had access to them. This is not about security, but dangerousness. Combs' head of security has been served with a subpoena. And one of the themes here is that even if Combs doesn't personally have guns anymore, he can get access to them. The government is now referencing the hotel video with Combs' ex-girlfriend, Cassandra Ventura. The government says they have evidence that there was one commercial sex worker there in the room to assault. She isn't even wearing shoes. She's in danger. So Nima, a lot to break down. First, let's start with the weapons there. The idea of his head of security being served with the subpoena, what's the move there?
Well, the move there is to get everyone to flip against Diddy, right? We know that in any type of conspiracy, including a RICO conspiracy, any of the co-conspirators, whether they're named or indicted or not, we obviously don't have indicted co-conspirators here, they're criminally liable for the crimes committed in furtherance of the conspiracy. We all know that, I mean, as prosecutors. So the government has a lot of leverage over the individuals working for Diddy. It could be someone who was doing something as simple as providing an IV, changing the bed sheets, setting up the cameras or lighting for these freak-offs, or getting the baby oil. They are all potential co-conspirators. So the government wants to lean on all of them, flip them, to make sure that they cooperate and they testify against the target of their investigation, which here is Diddy. You know, I was surprised, and I agree with Natalie, by the way, on, you know, We had 6 months. I thought this was going to be a 100-page indictment with lots of allegations, and it was pretty sparse in terms of the number of victims, witnesses identified. And with respect to the gun charges, U.S. Attorney Damian Williams got up there, talked about these AR-15s with the obliterated serial numbers. Obviously, that's a big deal, and the would-be assassin for Donald Trump. But Diddy wasn't indicted on that either. So
Yeah.
pretty sparse indictment, in my opinion.
Yeah, Natalie, why is that, right? In the sense that, if you look at all the allegations in the civil complaints, and it's not entirely clear how much of this criminal case is based on the allegations from the civil complaints. I mean, I did a sidebar episode that's coming out tonight where we actually compare a lot of them, and there are similarities, whether it's Rodney Jones who filed the lawsuit, whether it's Cassandra Ventura, but there's no mention of minors. Remember, there were allegations that Combs was soliciting minors. There are no gun charges. You could bring a federal charge of possession of a weapon with an obliterated serial number. A lot of the predicate underlying crimes within the racketeering case, this criminal enterprise, some of them are state charges like arson, but how come there wasn't more? How come this wasn't, as Nima said, a 100-page indictment?
Yeah. So I think if we look at it in the light least favorable to the government, you would say that just playing the average, they didn't think they had the probable cause as to these other charges. But I don't actually think that's what it is, because they said they found a AR style weapon with an obliterated serial number in his bedroom, in his closet. So that's at least constructive possession, and they could have indicted him on that. They didn't. I think they're trying to focus this case down to what they know they really can prove, right? And what they know is going to get their case done. And so they're not gonna, I think, go to more of these like extraneous things. The heart of the matter is coercive, forced sexual intercourse with people being trafficked against their will, people being drugged against their will, and they're just trying to prove that. And also, I also want to say about the allegations regarding minors, that came from the Little Rod lawsuit. And if anyone's read that lawsuit, it's extremely questionable. Those allegations are extremely questionable. So they may not have found probable cause for that. They don't even mention it in the bail package, where they mention things in the bail package that they didn't mention in the indictment. So I don't think that there's any evidence that minors were involved here. And I think that's why they didn't go forward with that. But I think they want to really concentrate on what they know that they can prove.
That's a good point. So, and by the way, another question for you, Nima, about that 2016 video, which I think is now, when that came out, back in May, I think it was, CNN published it. We were all wondering, is this going to make its way into a federal case? Majority of people we spoke to said yes. Clearly it has. I mean, this is visual evidence where Sean Combs admitted essentially it was him, apologized on Instagram. And now if they can say this is right after a freak off, that there was somebody else in that room and Combs is in a towel, this remains one of the key pieces of evidence in this case. And we're not even thinking about all the other digital evidence they might have gotten as well, because in this bail package, in the letter from yesterday, they talked about retrieving surveillance footage, videos from the phones of victims and witnesses. 90 cell phones, I think, that they recovered. So that piece of evidence, I'm not surprised the prosecutors are really focusing in on that.
No question, Jesse, and it's extremely powerful and extremely disturbing. And let's not forget, Diddy denied all the allegations through his lawyers up until CNN got that video, and we all saw it. The entire world saw it, him beating Cassie, holding a towel. I mean, it was just extremely disturbing to watch. And I always say, people can lie, victims, witnesses, the video doesn't lie. And there's no way that Diddy's going to get around that. The question I have for the government is, what took so long, right? The raids happened in May. Excuse me, the raids happened in the end of March. The video was released in May. Now we're, well into September. So, were you putting witnesses before the grand jury? Did it really take agents 6 months to go through all that video evidence? Because Cassie's lawsuit was filed in November, like you said, 2023. And if we were going to base the case into Cassie Ventura, why wasn't he charged last year? So really inexplicable delay, in my opinion, by the government.
Well, and Damian Williams, the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York, was asked that question and didn't really have a sufficient response to why it took that long. I mean, I think, Natalie, the fair answer would be if these lawsuits didn't come forward, if the laws were not put in place where these lawsuits could even happen, right? If you didn't have the New York Adult Survivors Act that created a look back window by which these individuals could come forward and submit claims that were otherwise time barred, this indictment would not be here today.
Absolutely not. The indictment would not be there. And that's why I take my colleague's comments very seriously. He's very much right. If you think about this, the feds have known about this issue at least as of November of 2023. If they truly believe that Diddy is out here coercing and forcing and drugging people into participating in these freak-offs, then he certainly, the government certainly should have put an end to it by indicting him. And doing their investigation and indicting him, and they have such a pared back indictment, shouldn't have taken so long for them to get here. And when they raided his house, people were making jokes about this online, but you really think about what this means. They're raiding his house. He's got 1,000 bottles of lube and baby oil and stuff meaning this stuff is still going on. What if there's still people being beaten and drugged under his auspices, and they don't stop it because they're trying to, I don't know, build a perfect case or something? They should have indicted us.
So that brings me to another question. We're actually getting questions in from viewers. Keep them coming. And I'm going to pose a question. I do want to provide two, though, about what's happening in court. Number one, the government said, or after the video came out, talking about the 2016 video, only then admitted it was him. But yesterday, it was claimed his clothes were taken by Cassandra Ventura, but that's not because they tried to say this was just a domestic spat, not her running off from a freak off. This evidence proves you cannot take the defendant for his word. Freaks the core of this case. And the government also just half a dozen of escorts who claim that they have participated, that these acts were not consensual. That's a big one.
Oh, it's a huge. I was thinking, like, what is the government doing, right? What's taking so long? I think they were concerned that some of the victims, and the way two reasons, maybe they're playing us in a civil case, and Diddy would pay them off, or they would be afraid to come testify at trial. So I thought their case is bulletproof, button everything up. They were going to grand jury, and I thought we would see that in the indictment, but really we didn't. We released an indictment based mostly on Cassie Ventura. If the commercial sex workers really have spoken to the U.S. Attorney's Office, they've grand jury, why didn't that make its way into the, maybe the government's holding back a little bit,
well,
saving some of their cards.
Wouldn't you agree, Nima? You don't have to put everything in the indictment, specific as possible, Nima.
You don't, but you should have arrested someone in danger and intimidating witnesses and trying to bribe people and using drugs and participate. If you really care about the public and the danger to the community, someone roam free for 10 months after these allegations, and 6 months after the raid. The reason why you arrest people, Jesse, is because you don't want them to talk to witnesses and obstruct justice. So everything that Diddy's, it's really the government's own doing, because they could have arrested him a long time ago.
Quickly, they might not have had enough evidence to have these actually prove that he should be detained. So I think they really wanted to build up a case. There could be a superseding indictment. They could hit him with additional charges, but they feel not only is probable cause, but also to suggest that there's enough here to keep him in here. Natalie, that we have a question from Terry Tube, because yesterday, Damian Williams, the ongoing investigation, and there has been an effort to say if you have, well, Terry Lee Goss on YouTube asks, do you think the fact mentioned tapes was a warning that they knew who took them to come forward to give evidence?
Because that's exactly what I was thinking when I read it yesterday. I said, okay, why are they putting it after they've been investigating this case for months and months and months of this case? But they're putting out this public call for information. What that means is that they're giving people the opportunity to reach out to them and say, hey, look, I did this thing with Diddy. Should I contact law enforcement now before they come and raid my property? No, I do think that's a part of it. I think that they want more information. You know, here's another thing. They may not have all the information that they want. That maybe that's why it's long for them to get to the indictment. Maybe they genuinely need to do this additional, thing. But it's better to have more people on the government side participating and cooperating in exchange for deals than to have everyone close their mouths and then they can't do an investigation. So I think that's definitely a part of it. And I think you're really bright for noticing that.
There you go, Terry. So, Mr. Williams basically said that nothing's off the table. And Nima, when you think about this, right, is it possible he could be hit with charges in other jurisdictions, hit with state charges, or now that he's hit with federal charges, it seems like go first. That would trump the state charges, at least in terms of the order of problem. Do you think that this could be where we see? I mean, look what happened with R. Kelly. Remember how many jurisdictions he was hit with, charges in. Do you think that that's something we could see here with respect to Combs?
Possible, right? We've seen it obviously with Weinstein, right? And so there's value in hitting someone in multiple jurisdictions, because if not guilty or there's a case that's reversed on appeal, he might be a free man right now, or at least out on bond if those California, especially when you're dealing with victims of sex crimes, you really do a day in court and the opportunity to be heard if to testify. So absolutely. Now, with respect to some of the state charges, I've been asked a lot about the Cassie meeting, for instance, the statute of limitations run on some of these charges. Even on the federal side, we're waiting. We know that RICO, you can essentially charge even state crimes for which the statute of limitations has run, but normally fall within that 10-year period. You want 2 or more within that 10-year period. So the longer the government waits, the more problematic. But I agree with you. When you're talking about additional charges, I'm not jurisdictions, Jesse. I'm thinking about additional people. And kept secrets in Hollywood. We know that he didn't participate in them alone. Spread rumors, but there are a lot of celebrities in these acts. And the question is, we don't want a Jeff Epstein type situation that should have probably been charged and have a warrant because they weren't the ringleader of these freak-offs or these. You should be charged, whether in state or federal court, in my opinion.
Hearing Natalie and Nima, we are getting more evidence, or the prosecution has. Apparently, there's some text message. When left up, you knock me around. I'm not a rag doll. I'm someone. They said that the government has witnesses who saw these injuries happen behind closed doors in houses, hotel rooms, cars. Judge from yesterday, Judge Robin Tarnowski, to be so concerned, and that the judge found that she did not believe defense counsel can control the really significant here. One of the things that I want to bring up from the government is apparently there are communications after November 2023, after Cassandra lawsuit, and they said this is where the defendant was clearly concerned the possibility of law enforcement. So if they can show that That's another reason why he shouldn't be let out. They say some of the said things on calls like, I can't really talk on this phone. You feel I'm not even supposed to be talking on the phone. I can't be on these phones. I can't even talk on the phone. Like, please send no texts or do nothing. Please, people misread. If that's true, A, does that make its way into a trial against Combs? And B, that will not be great for him, I imagine, in terms of him getting some sort of bail package.
Right. So I'll kind of go in reverse. As far as bail is concerned, not good. You have an awareness that you're looking into, that you're potentially being tapped, and you have something to hide. And so you're like, don't talk on the phone, don't talk on the. When clients of mine do things like that, don't talk code, tell Johnny to go pick up an apple across the street when you need something else, right? It doesn't work well before it comes to getting them released. Whether or not that comes at trial, it could under something called against interest and consciousness of guilt. So that could ever become relevant at trial. It's very speculative there, but there is one way to get in defendant statements. Defendant statements are statements, but they also can come in if they show that the person is that they are going to be incriminated, right? So this thing is going to make actions in order to ameliorate that. And that's how, but again, very, very speculative at this moment.
So, that witnesses have come forward and expressed their fear. They're also claiming that Combs has had direct contact with a victim, so that again weighs heavily in the favor of the government. What I keep being asked, Nima, is Combs knew this was going to happen. He came to New York. In fact, his attorney yesterday anticipated that there would be sex trafficking racketeering charges, looking at life in prison. The question I keep getting asked is, all of these months, I know he surrendered his passport to, his attorneys provided flight plans to where. The question I keep getting is, why didn't he just jump on a flight and just keep that going to some country? I mean, maybe easier said than done, but why wouldn't he have done? He was probably going to be indicted, probably going to be detained, and may face.
Well, there's a couple reasons. One, Diddy is probably people in the world. He's not exactly gonna blend in, and who knows what his life is gonna be in one of their non-extradition countries. The other issue is his businesses are here. And frankly, this is someone people report that is a narcissist and he's beat charges before. Obviously, the court case, gun charge, the J-Lo nightclub shooting. He probably thinks he's the most expensive lawyers in this country that are going to fight this. Living a life sentence in another country, the best living situation from him, he's certainly not going to have his Ella or some other country.
Wow. I mean, his other option is that's the other option is prison. I'll tell you what, we have to hit it. We do. We're going to come back. We're going to see what's happening in that courtroom. We'll give you the update back.
everyone see me go, hey. Well, man, I'm going to barely get these anyway because I just got it. So, found a hole to shoot something. I'm not going to shoot much. Yeah, man, it's by use. It's what it is. They'll be able to hear it.
All right, welcome back, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber. We have this special coverage right now of Sean Diddy Combs' second attempt to get bail after he was indicted in federal court on 3 charges: racketeering, sex trafficking, and transportation for the purposes of prostitution. Yesterday, that bail was denied. There were a number of reasons submitted by the prosecution saying why he should not have pretrial release, that he is a danger to society, that he is a flight risk, that he has been obstructing justice by contacting witnesses and victims in this case. I'm back here with former prosecutor and attorney Nima Rahmani. I'm also here with criminal defense attorney Natalie Whittingham-Burrell. So we're getting updates right now from the courtroom. There are no cameras in that federal courtroom. Big mistake, in my opinion. I think there should be cameras everywhere, but there are no cameras. So we're kind of letting everybody know what's happening in real time. We have reporters there, or the reporters in there. We're following what they're saying. And we're also taking your questions on YouTube. So if you have questions about Sean Combs' case right now, please submit them. We'll talk about it on air. I want to give everybody an update. So the government is now bringing up lawsuits that were filed against Combs, referencing Dawn Richard, who recently filed a lawsuit against him. She was part of 2 groups two musical groups from Sean Combs, including Danity Kane. They're also that this was interesting. The government is claiming that Combs reached out to a victim. The defendant called her and gaslit her, trying to convince her it has been consensual, which, Natalie, as you mentioned before, that could be a defense, right? That's going to be trying to be a defense, that we are not dealing with minors here like we were dealing with the R. Kelly case, where you can't say a minor can consent to sexual activity. But here, these freak-offs, these events, yeah, they might be different to everyday Joe and Jane Smith, but if everybody's participating and everybody's agreeing and everybody's doing, drugs, he's not charged with drug crimes. He's charged with racketeering. He's charged with sex trafficking. That's what they're going to have to say. But as we talked about before, the government says they have witnesses, sex workers, who will claim this was not consensual. And that's going to be the issue. But do you think that's the main defense, saying this is all on the up and up, this was all consensual?
Defense, but it really is their only real defense. They can't say that the freak-offs aren't happening. They're almost admitting it. The evidence that's found in the home confirms it. The sex workers confirm it. And the defense confirmed yesterday that they spoke with some of the male sex workers, and they said that they gave them a different version of events and that everything was consensual, which confirms that the freak-offs were actually happening. So it wasn't me, I didn't do it, is not an available defense. The only available defense is that it was consensual. What's the difficulty with that? The allegation of intoxication. We know that people cannot consent when they are too intoxicated or inebriated. And also the video of Diddy beating Cassie, and the government's allegation that that is around the time of a freak-off, to show that he used physical force, coercion, and intimidation in order to force her into doing those freak-offs, which would not be obviously consensual. You can't beat somebody to force them to come back to the room and then say that that is consensual sex. So that's really what the issue is, but that's their only real defense. There is no other defense here.
And he doesn't have to mount a defense quite yet. He's not at trial. What he is trying to do is mount a successful defense to try to get bail. And Nima, I want to ask you, if he's denied bail here, is that it? Is he locked up till trial, or could there be circumstances where this issue could be revisited?
Well, we can certainly ask the court to revisit its detention order. Usually doesn't happen. Could also appeal to the Second Circuit, but much harder to win that appeal. Has to be an abuse of discretion. Trial judges have a lot of discretion to detain criminal defendants pending trial. But Natalie nailed it. And I know we're talking about the weight of the evidence. That's one of the least important factors when you're deciding detention. But that's something that judges consider when they're deciding whether someone's going to be dangerous or not. And so she's one of the best. There's really only 3 defenses in a sexual assault case. It didn't happen. It wasn't me. Or that it was consensual. And we know that Diddy's only substantive defense is going to attack the statute. He's going to attack the statute of limitations, indictment for vagueness. He's going to file all the pretrial motions that defense attorneys do. But substantively at trial, the only defense here is that all this was consensual.
And I want to go back to that defense in a minute. But first, just let me go back to something, Nima. When would a trial happen, right? If he's going to be locked up. And I spoke to an attorney yesterday who basically said that Combs' defense would probably, what they would do is file a motion that this is a complex case, that they need more time to review this discovery because it's probably so vast. When realistically do you think we would see the trial of Sean Combs in federal court?
Realistically, Jesse, I'm thinking the end of 2025 or even 2026, because we know it's obviously Diddy's right to a speedy trial under the Speedy Trial Act. He can demand a trial within 70 days of yesterday, his initial appearance, and you could refuse to waive time. But given the fact that there's so many witnesses, and this is essentially a cross-examination case, they're going to go after everyone that's testifying, say that this is all a money grab. These are civil plaintiffs. They filed lawsuits. They're trying to leverage it to shake Diddy down. They're going to go into their entire history of testifying, anything that may be admissible during cross-examination to impeach them, call them liars. So the defense is going to need their time. Now, obviously, it's much more difficult to defend a case, and Natalie will tell you when your client is in custody, right? You got to go into a prison or the MCC or whatever every day or every week to meet with your client. But the defense is going to need time. So I think this is going to be pushed out for quite some time, probably a year, maybe even more.
So one of the things I want to mention, Natalie, as there's now this discussion in court happening about Dawn Richard, who filed one of the last complaints against Sean Combs, is an attorney for Dawn Richard. Remember, she was part of this former musical group, Danity Kane, that was part of making the band. And Richard has accused Combs of sexual assault. This attorney told CNN that federal prosecutors have come forward and said, look, Combs has been reaching out to a number of people. Well, it turns out he allegedly reached out to a witness in Richard's own case, called this person 128 times, apparently. 128 phone contacts, I should say. Maybe not 128, but 128 phone contacts from Combs within 4 days after that complaint was filed. And that's again, if the phone records don't lie. So if you're trying to build a case and say that he's been reaching out to people to cover up, now I wonder if the defense would just say, this is nothing nefarious about this. He's not gaslighting them. He's just trying to talk to them. I mean, is there a way to explain this away?
That one made me cringe. It's really hard to explain that away. And as I said, I think at the top of the hour, it's very, very difficult when it's your client reaching out to witnesses. And this even builds on the prosecution's argument that despite his best efforts, and it seems like Diddy has a really good attorney who is really trying hard here. Despite his best efforts, his attorney cannot control Diddy. No attorney would advise their client to call one of the named witnesses in a lawsuit. And Diddy did that, and that was poorly.
So-
That was a terrible decision to make.
So, Natalie, to follow up with that, in real time, Combs' defense team is now making their argument to Judge Carter, and they are referencing reaching out to Kalina Harper, who is that witness in Dawn Richards' case. And Kalina Harper, I believe, came out and basically said that her experience with Sean Combs, let me rephrase. She came out and said that Dawn Richards' experience with Sean Combs is not reflective of her experience. So in a way, you could say she's saying, I'm not siding with Dawn Richards' allegations here. What makes that questionable is if Diddy did reach out to her and did color her testimony, did color her remarks, because she did make a statement about this. So that's now being discussed as well.
Yeah, it's so you have stained your case, right? If it was organic, if Diddy had never reached out to any of the witnesses or parties involved in any of his cases and just let his lawyers handle everything, then whatever facts were presented to the public and the courts would have been accepted by the public and the courts. However, if Diddy is calling somebody 100 and something times, it's not a logical misstep to then take the next logical leap and say, hey, maybe he paid her, influenced her, threatened her, cajoled her, sweet talked her into getting her to speak out in his defense. So it's just a really bad move. And of course, the defense is going to point to witnesses speaking to his benefit, but it's just all taken away by the fact that Diddy reached out to them. Litigants should never do that.
Yeah. All right. So now we have more questions. Again, if you have questions on YouTube, submit them. We'll answer them here. Nima, we have a question from KMiner210 on YouTube. They're saying he didn't act alone and may have had assistance by some staff members. Are there any other people who will be prosecuted in any of the same allegations?
It's a great question, Kay. And Damon Williams dodged that question during his press conference yesterday. And here's what I would do if I were the government. And these folks that work for Diddy, they are criminally liable for the sex trafficking, even if they didn't participate in sex acts, if they are co-conspirators and they committed those overt acts. So they're substantively on the hook, and they're facing a lot of time. Now, if I'm prosecuting this case and they come forward and they cooperate and they proffer and they testify truthfully, I'm probably not going after them. They didn't necessarily participate in the force, fraud, coercion, threats of these commercial sex workers, but absolutely they're looking at charges. And then there's those celebrities, the ones that haven't been charged yet, that reportedly, if you believe the rumors, participated in the sex acts as well. Will they be charged? I think they absolutely should be charged. The question is, if it happened here in Los Angeles, where I live, is it proper for them to be charged here by the U.S. Attorney in Los Angeles, or are they going to be wrapped up in this indictment in New York?
Little update here. This is apparently Combs' other lawyer, Tenny Garagos, said that Miss Harper felt she was being besmirched. We did speak with her at 2 a.m. on the 11th. After speaking, the judge asked, what would be the reason for Mr. Combs to continue contacting her? Garagos replied, she was concerned she was in the media. Is that a satisfactory answer, Natalie?
That has nothing to do with contacting her. Not satisfactory.
So again, look, you mentioned they're in a kind of a difficult position. I want to go back to something here, Natalie, that I talked about with Nima. The defense has said that they have been coordinating with prosecutors since the beginning. They knew that he was under investigation. He never left the country. He submitted his passport to the law firm. Every time he was leaving the state, his attorneys told the government. He came to New York in anticipation of these charges. The government's not persuaded and doesn't even believe that's real cooperation. What's your take on this? Should that be, if you're wondering if he's a danger, but more for this specific issue, if you're wondering if he's a flight risk, especially considering he knew that charges were coming and he didn't take off, and we talked about that before, doesn't that weigh in his favor?
No, here, unfortunately, it just doesn't. Let me just first start by saying that I understand what his defense attorneys were doing. And I keep repeating, I really think his defense attorneys are doing a great job with a not so great defense case right now, right at this current stage. They're having a really hard time getting their client out of jail. However, there is this concept in government regulations that's called regulatory capture, where you're supposed to be, as a member of the government, regulating something, but the thing you're supposed to be regulating sweet talks you, and so you don't do your job. For example, you get gifts and nice phone calls from the opposing side, and so you don't do your job. In a way, what was happening here was a manipulation. It looked like a manipulation from defense counsel. Here's everything Diddy's doing. I have every single passport of every single person that's ever known Diddy in life. He's not going anywhere. We're selling his plane. How are you guys doing? Do you want a cup of coffee? Please don't arrest my client. Please agree to release my client. That's not the job of the prosecutor. The job of the prosecutor is to protect the community and to do justice, right? And so it can't be through sweet talking that they decide, you know what, he's a good guy. We're just going to let him go. He has way more resources than anyone else. We'll let him stay out of jail until it's time for him to come to court. And that is, I think, how the prosecution is taking the overtures from the defense as a way to try and undermine the role of the prosecution. And that's not me casting aspersions on the defense, because it's very creative, and also they're advocating for their client. They have a different goal, right, which is to protect Combs above all else. The prosecution's goal is to protect the community. And so it's just not going to work saying that they're going to do all this stuff when we know the reality is he is a billionaire. Now that he has been indicted, if you keep him out, he is, by dint of his wealth, a flight risk. It doesn't mean that wealthy people don't get out of prison, but not most wealthy people are not indicted on charges of this nature.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what, you're making some really passionate arguments we're going to talk about on the other side. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
pizza italiana molto buona.
All right, welcome back, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber. And before we even talk about our extended coverage of the Sean Diddy Combs bail hearing part 2, we know we have audio issues. We're working on it through the scenes. Thank you for being patient with us. Hopefully, you stick with us. Hopefully we can work it out because we are getting to some really important information that's happening right now in real time. Although there are not cameras in that federal courthouse where Sean Diddy Combs' legal team is advocating for him to be released on bail. Pre-trial detention, they say, is not appropriate in this case. Prosecutors would disagree. And even though a judge yesterday denied Combs bail, they have appealed this from a magistrate judge now to a district court judge. We're waiting for a decision, but we're seeing the arguments being played out. There are some really interesting things being put forward, both by the prosecution and the defense. I want to bring back in former prosecutor and attorney Nima Rahmani. I'm also joined by criminal defense attorney Natalie Whittingham-Burrell. Again, really monumental moment here because what you could have is Combs being denied bail and him being in lockup, being behind bars until his trial, which Nima mentioned before, could maybe be at the end of 2025, maybe 2026. And here's the thing that I want to bring up here, Natalie. So the defense team is raising a number of issues. The prosecution says that he's a flight risk. He's a danger to the community. Look at the allegations. Look at the weight of the evidence. He's been contacting witnesses. He's been contacting victims. The defense says, listen, not only will we put up a $50 million bond secured by the property, not only GPS monitoring, not only will he surrender his passport, all that. They say they have brought the head of Sage Intelligence today, and they are proposing that Sage Intelligence personnel, all former law enforcement, will be monitoring Combs' home 24/7 to make sure he doesn't leave. The defense is also proposing a visitor log, and they would give that list to the court. So who would be coming to and from his house? And the defense also says that Combs will not have access to a cell phone or access to the internet if he's let out of jail. Is that sufficient, Natalie?
I say that is creative. And I, again, applaud the defense for how hard they're working for their client. I think that what it does do practically is address some of the issues that the court may have about Combs contacting witnesses. However, you have to question, I don't know anything about this company. I'm not casting any aspersions on them, But I don't know what their reputation is within the federal courts for doing things of this nature, because that's not the norm. People will be on GPS monitors, or they'll be in custody, or they'll be released without conditions. But it's not usually some private security firm basically making the person on home detention and house arrest at home. That's a little different. And so I don't know what type of quality controls that they have, and that might be the issue for the court. Outside of quality control, they're doing the best they can to address the issue of contact with witnesses, obstruction, and manipulation of evidence.
I mean, essentially what they're saying is all of your concerns that you have, that he's going to reach out to people, that he's going to leave, we can alleviate that. He doesn't need to be in federal lockup. He'll essentially be in lockup in his house. And by the way, Nima, another update. And by the way, if anybody has questions on YouTube, submit them. We'll answer them here on air. The defense is also saying that he's responsible. He's not a flight risk. He came to New York in anticipation of the charges. He gave up his passport. They took the passports of 5 of his family members. We have a letter of intent to sell his airplane. Your thoughts?
I agree with Natalie. A, for creativity. I thought the defense has done a good job addressing the flight risk, but there is no rich person exception to our federal detention laws or celebrity exception. What they're trying to do is basically put him on home confinement. And that's possible, but that's something pretrial services has to do and has to monitor. So if I'm the judge, and obviously I'm not deciding cases based on what the public perception is, but I have to think to myself, what sort of criticism is this court going to receive if we grant this really extraordinary type of pretrial detention that no other criminal defendant would be afforded the opportunity to do so? I would treat Diddy just like any other criminal defendant, or put him in pretrial detention, have pretrial services monitor him, make sure he comes to court. The marshals will bring him just like everyone else, because he's just like any other defendant who's been charged with drug and sex trafficking.
So here's the thing. The judge hasn't made a decision yet. But based on the reporting that we're seeing from inside that courthouse, it seems the judge, in my opinion, is going to side with the prosecution once again. Why do I say that? According to this, the judge just asked the defense to get to the point and said, if Combs was aware of the charges in April, why was he contacting witnesses? Again, that seems to be the point that neither Judge Tarnowski from yesterday or Judge Carter today, and even though, and Nima, you said it so well before, this is a district court reviewing the magistrate court decision de novo, meaning anew, from the beginning, fresh. It seems that this judge is also being persuaded, Natalie, that he should not be let out, that the idea of contacting witnesses is what set this off.
And that's what's going to get, so for example, say he had not contacted witnesses and he had been released on some type of pretrial services or a very high bond amount, and then he turned around and did it while he was out on bond, started contacting witnesses, that would get his release conditions revoked. Courts really do not like that. They do not like any idea of witness tampering. Another point that hasn't really been brought up from the court that I've heard, or anyone else really, is if you think that you're going to be indicted any minute now, and you're coming to New York in anticipation of indictment because you're so cooperative, why do you have pink drugs, ecstasy, 2C, whatever it is, on physically on your person, and firearms with obliterated serial numbers in your home? Why would you have that if you really thought that you were going to be arrested? So I think that all goes against that argument for the defense. I think it was more that he was just narcissistic and didn't think that anything would ever come to him, and he would just get to go on doing whatever he wanted.
Yeah, see that's the problem, and I mentioned that before in the government's letter. Is this idea it didn't stop. Right? These allegations, yes, they're from a number of years span, but if he has recently been contacting witnesses, if he's in New York and he has narcotics on him, which again, the allegations were is that he was supplying people with narcotics during these freak-off sessions. And then I mentioned this letter from the prosecution that it says, since at least in or about January of 2024, Which, by the way, he probably thought he was under investigation. The raids didn't happen yet, but the lawsuits happened. When the defendant was unquestionably aware of the criminal investigation, the evidence shows that he engaged in multiple freak-offs, some involving the interstate transportation of individuals to participate, has continued to use narcotics, and has contacted multiple witnesses. So, look, the NEMA, they're saying will take away his ability to do any kind of criminal activity, but it's not like he's sitting alone in an isolated apartment. He has this team. And I think what the prosecution has been saying, even if he personally doesn't have access to firearms or a phone, he can somehow get that message out, right?
No question, Jesse. He is running a criminal enterprise, and that's something that the government keeps harping on in their detention memo. And Natalie raised an important point. Let's say, in theory, Diddy were granted pretrial release. He would be subject to the standard conditions: obey all laws, no contact with witnesses. And there's a pretty high-profile case where an individual was granted bond, he contacted witnesses, and that bond was revoked. And that was Sam Bankman-Fried in the FTX fraud case. So if Diddy had contact with witnesses while he was out, federal judges routinely revoke bond and remand people into custody. That's considered tampering, obstruction of justice. Really goes to the heart of our criminal justice system and affects the integrity. So that's a definite no-no. If you're under indictment, you're under investigation, even if you're going to be sued civilly, every lawyer will tell you, don't destroy evidence, don't contact witnesses. And we know that Diddy had lawyered up and did this anyway, at least allegedly.
So I'm being fully transparent with everybody who's watching this. I didn't ask you that question because of the update that we just got, but it's almost like the court is listening to this live feed, because the judge just asked, under your plan, would he have employees? Right? Would he have employees? And the defense says they handle his finances. They're in California. Would he be able to leave his residence? The judge asked. No. The judge also asked, in the security, they could be there in the house? The defense, yes, in shifts. We could put cameras filming 24 hours a day. So at least the judge maybe seems receptive to it, or at least asking questions. Natalie, what do you think?
Judge is giving him the full opportunity to be heard and to make his record, right? But I think that this is a case of it just would not look good. This is not something that's available to anyone else. And I can't see a reason for why someone should be able to use their wealth to turn their home into a prison. And then we would have to trust that the company hired by the defense, paid for by the defense, would then follow through and not be at all influenced by Diddy and their supervision of him within his home. I can't see it. It seems massively unfair to indigent people who could never afford to do that.
So here is a great question that we just got from one of our followers on YouTube. Excellent question. It's from All Hail. The question, Nima, is how did Diddy know who were the witnesses for a sealed grand jury indictment? How was he given the list of the witnesses trying to get him indicted? I think you can even extend that. If he's reaching out to people in general, couldn't you say that in and of itself is evidence he knows what he did, right? Oh my gosh, they're charging me with what are they even looking into? I'm under investigation. What did I do? But the fact that he's allegedly reaching out to people means he knows exactly what he did. So how would he know who the government's speaking to?
Well, it's evidence of his guilt. He knows who was present at these freak-offs, right? He knows who the witnesses were. And let's be clear, grand jury proceedings are supposed to be secret, but these are some of the worst-kept secrets out there. You have reporters who sit outside the U.S. Attorney's office. They see who's coming in and out. We knew witnesses were testifying before the grand jury because, Jesse, you and I, Shanali, we all do a lot of TV. And reporters are very good at their job, and they got this information. So, yes, great question. But to answer in two ways, because of great reporting and because Diddy knows who is going to be a witness against him, that's why he was able to contact them.
I have a question for either of you. I think it's if whoever wants to jump in. So, for a racketeering case, right, where you have this criminal enterprise and you have all these underlying predicate crimes that he's not actually specifically charged with, like kidnapping or arson or forced labor, does the prosecution nonetheless have to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt? Do they have to prove forced labor beyond a reasonable doubt? Do they have to prove kidnapping beyond a reasonable doubt? And some of these are state charges, or is it preponderance of the evidence? I mean, I guess I'm trying to understand what a prosecution of a racketeering case like this would be. Is it just you have to establish that there's an enterprise, there's a criminal enterprise, there's a pattern, there was a common scheme? How much of those underlying crimes does the jury have to believe? Who wants to take it? Anybody want to take it?
I can take it as a former prosecutor. You have to prove every element of the crime beyond a reasonable doubt. And in a RICO conspiracy case, obviously you have to prove the unlawful agreement. You have to prove the overt acts and furtherance of the conspiracy. Obviously, we know the enterprise. It doesn't have to be a formal organization. It's defined as a loose association of two or more people. And like you said, Jesse, you have to prove those.
Okay, Nima, I'm apologize. We lost your audio right there. Natalie, you want to pick it back up?
Nina's actually absolutely right. You have to prove every single element of every single offense beyond a reasonable doubt. And if the element of the offense is that he kidnapped someone or committed arson by blowing up Kid Cudi's car, for example, they would have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he actually did those things. And it has to be at least two of those acts within the span of 10 years in order for it to be predicate offenses for RICO. So, Kid Cudi has already come out and said, yes, his car was blown up by Diddy. So I think they'll be able to at least prove that. And we know Cassie has come out and said that yes, he did sex traffic her. That's what she said he did to her, sex traffic her. And so those two events happening within 10 years of each other inside the statute of limitations, that's how the government would be able to prove their case.
Okay, that's important to know because we're trying to understand not only what the charges are, but also what the defenses would be. I have another update for you. Oh my gosh, I wish we had cameras in there because apparently it's getting a little heated. The judge is referencing the infamous 2016 hotel video that we mentioned before, where Combs is allegedly beating Cassandra Ventura. The video is troubling. He was 40-something years old. The defense, he realized he has a problem with drug addiction and anger. He went into a rehab program for a period of time. They loved each other. The sex and the violence were totally separate, motivated by separate things. They were close to being intimate. They would bring a third person on. They chose that. Then the judge is talking about what does that have to do with him punching her, throwing a vase at her? What's love got to do with that? The defense, that was jealousy from infidelity in both directions, Mr. Combs, and this other person, the violence is from that. Judge says, what is your point? Nima, if you're back with us, what do you make of it? All right, I think we're working on Nima. Natalie, I'll go to you.
Just let me jump in here. First of all, I audibly gasped when the judge says, what does love have to do with that? Because when I was reading through there was like a Twitter thread that was about the hearing yesterday, and the defense counsel, I thought this is where the defense counsel made their biggest mistake in the hearing yesterday, and I cannot believe that they repeated it again, which was by victim blaming. Completely unnecessary here when talking about the two factors of dangerousness and flight risk. When it comes to dangerousness, if you want to pull Diddy away from what he did in front of that elevator in that hotel room, you say that was a long time ago. He's worked on himself. He's no longer dangerous. He would never do something like that again, right? Like you cannot hold him in jail because of something he did 8 years ago, let's say. But instead he's saying, she was into this. She liked this, and she attacked him first. Nothing on that video justifies anything that the attorney is saying. That was a brutal assault, visceral to watch. And so I think that that was a landmine that the defense attorney has stepped on twice. So I'm not going to be surprised if Diddy is held again now, because he made the cardinal mistake 2 times. And that's really what the dangerousness assessment is all about. You can't assure me that your client is not going to harm somebody again in the future if the best explanation that you can give is that she was asking for it. That's terrible.
Why do you think he admitted it was him? Why do you think he went on that Instagram and admitted it was him, Natalie?
Admitted it was him that what? Sorry.
Well, I mean, so in that Instagram, right? He didn't have to respond to that video, but that video was so clear. He had nothing really to say, but he says, "I'm sorry, I was messed up." You think his lawyers advised him to do that?
No, I don't think his lawyers advised him to do that. I think that I never thought that Diddy was taking the potential of a criminal case seriously, even though he retained counsel to, look into it and everything like that. I don't think he ever thought that this day was really going to come, because I said it at the time, this statement is incriminating. Yes, we can see that it's him clear as day, but don't admit it, because now when you're in court trying to get out, you can't say, we don't know what was going on that day. We don't know when that video was from. I don't know anything about that. That wasn't my client. I don't know what they're talking about. Right? You have taken away all the authentication issues that could possibly arise.
Oh boy, yeah, I don't know if he's looking back on it and thinking that was the best decision. But I'll tell you what, Natalie Whittingham-Burrell, Nima Rahmani, I want to thank you both for coming on. Nima, sorry we had a couple of audio issues. We are going to have to sign off right now. We'll wait to see what the judge decides, whether or not Sean Combs will be locked up pending trial. We'll wait and see. Thanks so much for joining us, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber. Catch you next time.
That we need to be